So about 4 days out of 15 or so with sun, and about 2 days without rain. I don't know what this assembly of posts and wires is for. It looks like it's something to hold vines of some sort. Either that or canopies for a huge fair, something like that. Interesting, there's new piles of those things, and there's bazillions of them piled up that are old alongside the railroad system. Dismantling one of the railroad lines, but I wonder why they bother to go to the effort of dismantling it when it's not going anywhere and they're not going to use it. They're just going to store it someplace. Seems like a lot of wasted energy without a known purpose. Saw them rebuilding a bridge over a culvert, so it's possible they're going to completely rebuild all this. New electrical works also. And here's another example. It looks like they've dug out, maybe to put in a new base. Maybe it's going to be for a bigger high-speed Euro train. There's some major work here. Yep. It looks like they're building a whole totally different new line in here. Here we can see that the new track is installed. New cement ties. It may be that they've just determined that to put in a high-speed train, if that's what this is going to be, and I assume that's the effort, you can't run the risk of there being stresses in old steel or old concrete. Church in a small village we're, I think, passing through. Here the old man gets a cab for he and his wife and their brooms to probably go to a public market. So, interesting old building. Notice the Star of David on. Remember, that has no necessary relevance just to the Jews in this part of the world. And the central historic area is past this building, so we'll just go this way. This is the simple church I saw from the train. Looks like a simple Christian church, nothing in particular about it. This is interesting. Ipan Med, yin yang, and there some Chinese symbols. Beauty center. So this town looks old, but it looks very neat, like the people take respect and pride in their village. The signs keep saying Central Historic Area. There's an old pump. The house behind it isn't, but that building up there is old looking. This may be an older design home. There's a church I want to get to. I shoot anything that doesn't move because I don't know what's old and what's not old. A little square that may count as historic. Those little homes up there with their arched entryways. And this gives us a nice view of the church and its There's another little square in front of us, but we'll pan out in case we don't get a better view of the church. Although I'd rather think we will. So much more interesting and old-looking squares than Sibiu. with a pretty little park in the center. Now this really is what you'd like to think was the way things might have been. Well worth the 2-hour stop here. About all I can do is just slowly pan this so that I have the memory recorded. It is tourism that protects these places. Here, a lovely little park with chairs designed for sitting. Here, a little attempt to restore in what might have been semblance of the past. But for most of these folks, being on the square is an economic adventure, as it was then. Probably one of the most nicely designed entryways that I've seen so far. And it was a building yet to return to its former great glory. A little bit closer look at the detail. This probably was and could be again a very beautiful building if there were the economic motivation to restore it. Here, another little mini park, and coming into view the entrance into the large square we were at a moment ago. And now at another square, which is behind that big church relative to where I started seeing it. And apparently through there is how we get access into there somewhere. I wonder what the significance of this structure is or would have been. Inside the complex, or the walls that surround this church, are a couple of towers. They look like they're brand new, or at least been recently completely restuccoed. Is he going to give you a tour or something? Some claim I don't. Nothing particularly interesting at all. It may be that the church is just as much a fortress as was the Bronze Castle, a fortress and a residence. Walking a side street now, and even it seems to be interesting. This may be a chunk of the original wall. I'm entering the town, the antique area from another street now. I'm entering it from the opposite end that I came in at, which was to my right. It's pretty square for old folks to sit about. Old guys have to have a place to sit and chat when they're in retirement. You can imagine in the evening this is probably a pretty busy place and a fun place. People probably do the walk continuously all around the square. This is my next train, a little bit nicer quality for Sibiu. And the idea of stopping here, even though the train ride's longer than the bus, was a great idea because that was a nice little historic center to visit, not to mention the ice cream. I don't know whether this in the center is an aerial or what it is. It's next to some lilac trees that are pretty. saw are on their land. I wonder what this little building is for, right next to a railroad station. It looks like a well. These are huge grasslands. You'd think we'd see more animals, particularly to fill those 4 huge bins. It stands out if nothing else because of the red and yellow color. Another huge forest of those devices that have string between them. This is my hostel, which also includes the bar, Cath Kultur. This is the owner. Donna is the lady who works here. Walking back up the way I came, just since I'm familiar with it, I'll start there and build my knowledge base. Since nobody would suspect that I am a tourist, I'm going to do a 270-degree pan here on Piazza Mara, which is the main square here in Sibiu. And probably one of the benefits of this, if you can see the clouds above, and the crack of thunder that we heard a few minutes ago. And this may be the only picture that I can take in which I'm not inundated with rain. And sometime later on my 2.5 days here, we will dissect this square. And we'll dwell just for a moment on this very pretty Art Nouveau building. And then I'm going to go in search of the clock tower, or actually it's called the Council Tower. I believe it's that one. It gives us access to Pieta Mica, or the small square. Now this, which looks like a cage, is a either restored or rebuilt cage. If you, in prior centuries, decided to have one hell of a night on the square and become a nuisance, you spent the next day there, to the ridicule and merriment of all, including your friends. And we'll get a closer look at this tower in a few moments when we walk under it and through it. With its bulb. Double entry tower, as you can see. I think these patches are left to show us some of the history, although it doesn't define what it is. It gives us an idea of what it constructed of and what it might have looked like at once. Not old, but interesting. So here we are at Piazza Mica, and I suppose I should get the map out so you know where we're at. My hostel is right in the middle of the left side, where it says hostel, right below Haller House. I've walked past Haller House and Hecht House to get up here to Piazza Mara. I came from the railroad station, which is in the direction my thumb is pointing, and now we have walked through the tower to Piazza Mica up here. Now there's some confusion in my mind as to what all this is between here and here. We're going to walk down here because what we're going to see is called Liar's Bridge, or the Bridge of Liars. It was the first wrought iron bridge in Romania, for all that that is worth. And we'll go down and take a look at it. First from below, and then a little bit later, sometime from above. And also from this square, I'll pan these 2 churches that I can see from here. And we'll find out what those are later. Here, a colorful building, recently painted and now being fully restored on the right, as you can see. And it's close to the bridge. And we'll walk underneath and see what the underside looks like. My guess is that this controlled access means we're leaving the core of Old Town, but still buildings are preserved, as we'll see in a moment. And as we go down, we're getting into the area of... And there the council tower seen from beside the Liar's Bridge, looking back into Piazza Micah. And I want to get a little shot of this finial tower that looks pretty. Okay, in theory we're here in Piazza Hood because this is the Biserica Evangelica, whatever that means, under great restoration. And these restorations are not to be scoffed at, because this is the kind of thing that guidebooks 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 years from now will reference. It may be useful that I pan some of this. In fact, I pan right here and go right up to the top of the tower of this church, mainly so that we can see the different styles of roof tile decoration, as well as the tower itself. Here we're looking at the back of a building on Piazza Micah. That's pretty. And still another that unfortunately is somewhat obscured by those trees. Here a little bit fuller view of this building. I don't know what style that is, or what the function of that is, or what it's supposed to mean. Interesting that the old tiles are being kept. Perhaps other churches or other buildings will use these. It's interesting that the towers, or the tops of the towers, get all of the embellishment. And it's not thought to do something unique with the rest of the building. Of course, the inside may have spectacular stained glass. I don't know if we'll get inside or not. Where I am right now is right where it says Historical Museum. And we're going to proceed down in the direction my thumb is moving. The museum is there, and we're going to move down towards these two churches. Today it may be appropriate to repaint all of these buildings. Simple, plain, austere, slight allusion to monumental design. Attic entry on that building. And substantial doors that we haven't seen before with nice filigree above. Shutter, I just find these interesting details. Ever since I was in France, noticed the hinges, nothing spectacular but interesting. Notice how this is a kind of a lock here. And notice how each of the little panels is attached to that main piece. Did people live in those dormered upstairs attics? Dickens would suggest they did. This is either the Metropolitan Church or the Trinity Cathedral. This is either the Metropolitan Church or the Trinity Cathedral. I suspect one of its occupants. I think those are the Orthodox. Maybe the same bird I was photographing, although it wasn't pure white like that one. The building 1892. Pretty in blue. Across the street from the cathedral, I don't know exactly what this is, but it's some beautiful paintings here. This may be the Trinity Cathedral. Again, I don't know what this leads to. If I'm going to walk in the rain, I might as well walk in a pretty park. There's something novel about walking in a pretty park in the rain. Not to mention that spectacular looking fountain down there. Classic building. At least it's nice when there are places where the overall intent is to be pretty, that the buildings are refurbished. On the outside, when you look through those driveway portals that we sometimes come across with the arch, it's very much different inside. Very rough, very old, very unrestored. I think it's nice that they've left this old tree remains here. Very Chinese. Here we are, all standing in the rain. Only the people in love find it worth doing. View from my hostel room, which overlooks the main walkway. The big square Piazza Mare is up to our right there. Old men gather to chat in the morning, grateful for the fact, without recognizing it or commenting on it, that there is a morning for them. Right off the square is this historic building. There are many, almost everything here is, which is good. But what I thought was fascinating was this door, not fascinating but interesting, that is divided and pretty so to have a center regular door. Fortunately, these large older buildings have been nicely painted, so it gives the area a generally prettier look than elsewhere. And another. There are 2 or 3 noted houses in this area. One is the Haller House, one is the Heft House. I haven't been in either one, but this is a third. Not noted in the guidebook, and it may be possible to enter it. It doesn't look that old. I'm walking the opposite way on the road that I entered town in yesterday, and to begin my tour of the city walls, etc. And I'll explain that when I get up to my turning. It's interesting in old towns to see how appurtenances or additional rooms and so forth have been added to old buildings. So right now we're standing at the intersection of the street I walked down yesterday and this one I'll call Iancu. And I'll pan down here, sorry to take you on that rush of a ride, but it's right here, dead center, where you see my arrow go down to the lower left. It's that upper left, Iancu. So we're going to go down here, make a little jog to the right, and then another jog to the right, and then to the left up through here, and then we'll start down along the tower. There's a collection of about 5 city eyes. They look like they've been recently bolstered up. And it may be that they simply provide air movement through that roof, or attic, which is quite high. So often in my travels, it's the roofs that offer the most interest. And just looking at this building, we get an idea of how the surface is constructed. And again, I love these views up across roofline. Here we see deterioration, but an insight nevertheless. A lot of brick. Here my map tells me that I'm in Piazza Maica, but I don't think so. But maybe I am. That's where I am according to this. It's right there, so I must be right at this, somewhere in here. Where we are is right where my thumb is, right to the left of Piazza Maica words. Right at that diamond shape, you can see it right there. So this is not a very pretty square right now, but maybe someday when they're through restoring it, it will be. Difficult to get this without the reflection of the building opposite. Someday this little diamond space will be a very, hopefully pretty area that will draw tourists in the shadow, if you will, of that church. Down a side street now, this is what I love to see. The effort being made to at least hold up the building until they got time and incentive to restore it. These buggy little cars just seem so cute to me. Okay, trying to approach the powder tower along Oseni to Engels, I got into another dog attack. Fortunately, they pick up the rock off the ground. Causes them to stop and scurry back, even if there isn't a rock in your hand, although there was. So I may well be at the Tanner's Tower now, and if so, I'm going to try to walk back up along the river and get to the Powder Tower. So this is a pretty substantial sized tower, quasi-bastion compared to what we saw at Sibiu yesterday. The only thing mildly interesting, on the right side you see the sloping beam from what was at some point in time a structure added to it, and you can see that corresponding angle on the building to the right indicating that was the dimensions of the building. And it looks like here maybe either some structure coming off of it or a buttress of some sort, and then this holes there that provided a awning or a porch cover for the entryway. It's interesting to figure out where the wall was, because those are firing ports indicating that the wall is to our right. And noticing the street Korsakov, and we're standing right at the intersection of it and Zidu that should be the Tanner's Tower. This was kind of a pretty door, probably not that old. Not hard to continually orientate yourself to that large council tower. Here an old building, not restored but not fallen down yet. Looks like from the awnings and the shades that are drawn that it's still in use, and I think the river is over here. So here a big open air market, and we'll go look for that tower and then come back here and check this out. Going to look at these different sites is not the point. It's just an excuse to roam around town and discover things like this market. Okay, I'm now on the opposite side of this industrial abandoned wrecked complex. I was at the far right hand corner of that building there when I was attacked by the dogs, and I can't see any evidence over that high wall of this first tower, the Powder Tower, unless it's the tower that I'll show you in a few minutes when I walk back down to that market that's next to a yellow building. I just don't remember whether the Tanner's Tower was next to a yellow building. Here's the only tower that I can see from this side of that complex, and when I check out my earlier film during editing, I can determine if that is the Powder Tower or the Tanner's Tower. I'm thinking it's the Tanner's Tower. But since we're over here, here's a cute little house or building of some sort with a cute little roof. I wonder what this abandoned factory complex was. They were at the corner of that marketplace, and that says lactate and carne, so you know it's milk products and meat products. So these are various cheeses. I could go inside. The EU cleaned up a lot of this so that it's nice and neat with all different kinds of cheeses. Lively section here all the way down. These are probably made in local farms or communities nearby. Now we're outside in the marketplace. So we'll just kind of roam around and see what there is. As with most markets like this, it should be a little bit of everything. Flowers, birds, rabbits, turtles. Time of year too for people to be dressing up their yards and homes with plants, both vegetables and flowering plants. Boy, rich produce, good looking tomatoes. Like that, not a turnip, parsnip, something like that. All markets, you wonder what happens to this produce when it doesn't sell. Maybe it goes back to smaller and smaller villages. Where do these come from? Is it local or just shipped in? And this is the way you disseminate it. Looks like it. Trying to get towards the fruit section, I think. Prunes, nuts here. All kinds of vegetable oils, more vegetables. The honey. Notice that the honeycomb is inside the honey. Walnuts inside there, yeah. Here, I get to taste some of this. Good. Pears. See those businesses that are probably need an infrastructure like the meat counters, fish counters, that sort of thing, and probably restaurants for folks who work here as well as those who visit to have lunch and breakfast. Individuals will try and sell whatever they've encountered on their own. All kinds of sausage and ham and everything you could want. This was probably the wealthy people's home in this otherwise modest neighborhood, and there must have been a time when this was an absolutely gorgeous wooden door. And still it could be restored and polished to a beautiful patina. So now we're at Piazza Armoro, a modest little square. You can see that big tower behind us, the church tower. Here, a little prettier view of this tiny square. I have to know where this puppy was to find it. I just started climbing up the hill from that small little plaza we were at, Piazza something or other, right to the left down the hill a little bit. That was what's called Lower Town, and as I worked my way up the hill towards where all the tourist sites are, that's called Upper Town. Pretty sure that right now we're standing next to a chunk of the old wall, because if you look across the street it continues on. This city had a triple wall, so we need to look for evidence of that. A little hint of the construction of it. At least the outer wall was brick, and notice how wide some of those bricks are. Then the inner side was filled with rubble or bigger stones, and looks like grouting. Probably the inside was finished off with brick also. And here's a longer view of the remaining chunk of the wall. Okay, we're down in the lower left hand corner where it says Soldischen Tower, known as Bastion on Luli, which is the road behind me that we've been walking on. And here is the bastion, and quite sizable, and with some of the detail that we recognize, like that half circle ribbon around almost the top that you see on so many castles. I don't know what the purpose of that is. Now notice we were just behind this building videoing that part of the wall there, which comes from the far right, that long section we looked at. Butts up against this house, but appears almost to include part of it. In other words, it might have used the wall as part of its structure. And then the wall hangs its left turn and comes in against this bastion here. So we'll kind of try to get around it and see what we can see. You see how thick the entrance to this doorway is. It looks clearly like they built it into the wall itself. But here's the doorway, so let's see if we can get inside. Notice there was another, it looks like an entryway that's been blocked out. See more of the wall, so not quite sure which direction the wall goes. This wall here is perpendicular to the wall that we were just looking at. that was on our right. There it looks like there's some other archways. What they were for, I don't know. This certainly was the outer part of the wall, you would think, because there's the shooting ports. No, this is the inner wall. Back at this entrance we just came in, there's the part that was blocked up, so it was a port of some sort. But the outside, we're on the inside, that's the outside there. So that conical shape suggests that it was a firing port, perhaps for a pretty big cannon. Whereas up here, more discreet firing of regular firearms. Looks like the wall goes there. How far down it goes before it hooks around and ties back in here, I don't know. But notice the different levels. Like here's apparently a walkway. It almost, the remnant of it, or at least a ledge of some sort, whether it was supporting, you would think, a higher ledge that would have been up there for people to walk on to be able to be tall enough to shoot through those portals, and people were shorter then now. This corner building that ties into the bastion just appears to have used the theme. Here we're looking at the wall. Now we were back behind those trees and back on the other side of that wall. There's some kind of a, almost looks like marble plaque. But this might have been a corner. We'll go down and see if we can see any more evidence. Right now I want to get up, take a closer look at this. And just to clarify, you can see that we're up at a somewhat higher elevation. Okay, you can see that we're not too far away from the Metropolitan Church and the Trinity Cathedral, one of which I was at yesterday in the rain. But I'm going to go to my lower right, probably south-southeast, to Piazza Uniri, because that's where I get bus number 1 to go out to the main museum. Okay, here we're at Strada Andrei Saguna, and we'll go to our right. Here's a whole crew of guys. They paint these red and white by hand, as you can see. Do a fairly good job considering it's real quick and dirty. And I found Piazza Uniti and Piazza Teatrului, which should be down there somewhere. We'll just walk through here just to see how pretty it might be. Probably a little gypsy's family. Why they keep having children, I'm not sure, unless it's that age-old idea that your kids can work once they get to a certain age, particularly as gypsies and particularly as beggars. Okay, from the center of the page to the bottom it says Piazza Uniti. The road that runs from lower left, upper right from that point, all along there is evidence of the wall. So way down there we can see evidence of it, and here it continues on up, and here a gate. So we'll continue this way and wrap around, because I still want to try to find out where bus number 1 can be caught. Over there is one bus stop going one direction, and here's the other bus stop going the other direction. Neither one of those has a 1 on it. Up around the corner from this pan, I wanted to look at this old house. Look at how high its arched entryway is. Notice how it leans out. 2 churches I'm seeking are right up here, round to the left, I believe. Before I try and visit this church that I shot last night in the rain, I stood in a doorway just opposite the church. I'm going to go over to the park while the sun's still shining, because it's a real pretty contrast to how it was last night when it was pouring rain. The same preliminary pan as last night. And here, no doubt, old men playing, it looks like chess. Let's go see. Here it's a combination of chess and Chinese checkers. And there are cards. And what's interesting here, there are people of all ages playing. I always love those pictures. Eventually they figure out I'm shooting them, of course, and that's kind of fun because they either reject my doing it and say no, no, no. Most often they just smile and say something in their language, and I give an expression of hello and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to shoot that from the other side. It's a pretty little view into a backyard that looks nicely kept and old-fashioned. Must be a tranquil place. I'm not going to invade it. Sun graciously hides behind that cloud long enough for me to get a shot. Doesn't look like a very friendly God, does it? These churches are beautiful on the outside because of this interplay of domes and towers and spires. little toilet in the park, subterranean. My guess is that they reconstructed this wall, and at the time they just kind of scooted it around this tree. Here we're looking south along the wall, and I'll just pan slowly up. I'm guessing that gate was added, of course, recently. Here the second tower as we move north, but notice that it has an adjoining wall. So you get a sense of how defensive this was, and this is just 2 of 3. And here's the third tower. Notice the different levels of reconstruction in the tower and the wall itself. Looking south, I often wonder what the creators and builders of these historical monuments, if you will, would have thought had they been able to look ahead a couple of centuries and see how their works would be used. Hopefully they'd be quite pleased with this one. I'm guessing that these may be the names and plaques of the people who were instrumental in creating this park-like project. It's just a guess. Nakamura. The large, I think called Haller Bastion. It's a strange looking structure, but it does remind me of the one I saw in Brasov at the top of the hill. Panning from north to south, picking up another gate. Here is this curious, large, hulking bastion. But if it was so useful, why? Here's the view before we enter into this gate again. And go inside. Well, I hope the creators would be pleased with this park-like environment. Here, what's interesting is the design from the inside that they've reconstructed, which is great. Except that notice here was an entryway gate, covered up now. And I'm guessing that these arches that we see were simply structural. I'm guessing they were, although they don't look that structurally solid. Otherwise, I don't know what their purpose was. So the 2 towers that we see there should be the thick tower and the joiner's tower. And then there should be a potter's tower and a harquebuser's tower further on down. So I think we'll proceed straight ahead, which means past the park that should be up ahead of us to this Lutheran Church, just to see it, and then come back into the center and dissect that a little bit more. I just noticed what I think is a really nifty little detail on this house, or in this building at least. Just in case you don't read Romanian, but this guy does. Hopefully he's a friend of the family. I just think these stunted little buildings are funky. And this other one was behind me. I'm working my way around the block in the hopes that I'll encounter the Pharmacy Museum. Who last lived upstairs? And what was their life like? Not only in that building as the last person to occupy it, but the rest of their life. Some pretty detail on this house, I noticed. Just kind of novel even here. It not have been that long ago. And up there and all along the top of that building. This Art Nouveau building is apparently the City Hall and the Mayor's office, built in the early part of the 20th century. This house on the west side is apparently the Blue House or the Moringa House, number 5. And the top is the coat of arms of Sibiu, 2 men. Apparently it used to be 2 buildings and then it was unified in the 16th century, I guess. So originally it's 2 buildings, medieval buildings, dating from about the 16th century. And then it was combined, they were combined in the 17th century or the early 18th century by Baron Lambert von Muringer. Called the late Baroque style, but it looks boring and un-Baroque. And this building beside it to the right is the Brukenthal Palace, built sometime in the early 1800s, before he was Brukenthal was governor of Transylvania, first governor, in 1817. Now it may be in here that I find the pharmacy museum. The remaining 2 houses on the west side are simply 15th to 16th century Renaissance or Baroque styles. Well, I think there's more than one house hidden inside of that one on the right, and the one on the left looks interesting, but none of it describes Renaissance. This is the east side, and these houses date from as early as the 15th century, 1652, for the Wiedner Roosnor house, and then the Haller house built in the 15th century, 1472, and then the Hecht house built in the 15th century. This house is the Luch house. I wonder what the original colors were, or at least what the colors were used in their day. This is the house, 15th to the 18th century, and the 19th. Nothing particularly spectacular about these at all. But in their days, who they housed, it was important. And notice this house uses the city eyes and has more or bigger, thicker pediment detail around the windows. What that means, I'd love to have seen the colors. This is the Casa Wiedner house. Again, nothing impressive here, but what was probably inside was what was impressive. This may be the Rousseau house or whatever. Under back inside of here. Remember, what was behind that facade was probably what was really impressive. We won't get much of a hint of it here, probably. Doors original. And again, how was this decorated? Certainly would have, it looks like it tried to be impressive, but it's now just reduced to painted concrete. When these guys started on yesterday, it looks like a pretty nifty device. And I'm sure they'll cover it with a tarp awning of some sort. This is the Haller house. It really has eyes on the city. But imagine if you had been fortunate enough to go inside and see how they live. There has to be some symbology that was important to Mr. Haller. The Hecht house from the 15th century. Now remember, that's a 1400 somehow. I think this tower-like portion on the right was part of it. So this doctor was apparently the founder of the concept of homeopathy and was an employee for Brukenthal from 1777 to 1779. Go back, this is an important milestone probably in pharmacy and medicine. How much of it worked, what the knowledge was based on, excellent questions. A 1615 medicine cabinet. The critters, that looks like a fish of some sort, maybe this too. Ichtho, yeah, it is. May have been the basis for some of what they had here. Snake, is this a venom? A venom to protect you after you've been bitten, or is it some medicine made from the snakes? I don't know, but an interesting little exhibit. And here are sponges. Now, a pharmacist may be able to say that there is an antecedent to all of this. You wonder what coral would have been used for. What's interesting is to wonder what are the pharmacies today, pharmaceuticals today, were based on some of what we see here. Imagine those little vials to someone who is sick. Even as a placebo, they must have been important. Dr. Johann Honenberger, 1795-1869, became a doctor at the court of the Maharaja de l'Amour in the 19th century. Don't know whether that's the doctor. Not totally unfamiliar. Mills of some sort for grinding. And these perhaps for creating pills. Yep. Tablet making presses. Oh, that's interesting. Huh. Seed grinding. Huh. Various pestles and mortars. Probably some pharmacists back in the old day at work in their, what would have been the laboratory then. Maybe those shelves filled with pharmaceuticals of some sort. For producing suppositories in the first half of the 19th century, like 1800 to 1850. And these are pretty big. You wonder what they were working on. Maybe just like major pharmaceutical companies today, they were mass producing. You wonder what that's for. Pills would have been important as you thought or tried to think that you could be precise in the pharmaceuticals and their administration, just as we're discovering today that too much of what a doctor prescribes can be reduced to your benefit. Maybe this was intuitive to them, like knowing where north is all the time, which we've forgotten because we don't use the sun. And large mills and presses there, and stills. And for the things that worked and those that were placeboic, they were wonderful things for the people who were sick. Wooden pistols, the 18th century. Now, 18th century, we're talking the 1700s. So Franklin and his folks would have telescopes. Imagine how they opened up the tiny world as telescopes opened up the world for Galileo. Syringes. What are those little jobbies for? Look at that. Oh, determining the degree of short-sightedness. Things like this might have been very useful during the Civil War, although my guess is that much of what went on in the Civil War was simply chopping things off because you didn't have time. Ophthalmology, ophthalmological surgery. Wow, imagine that. You don't even think there was any medicine like that before 10 years ago. That's what our surgeon today used these tools effectively, if that's what he was limited or she was limited to. Devices for making suppositories. Don't know what that is. Huh. Oh, mini scales. Huh. Iron vial, that's an understatement. Pressing machine. You wonder what needed to be pressed that was pharmaceutical, that required this kind of power. This was a doctor's cabinet. Imagine how he relied on what was inside here. An elaborate case that you might find in a pharmacy. 19th century. And a set. We read the literature, in even any kind of popular literature, there would be references to some of these names that now most of us have no idea what they would have been and what they referred to. Menthol, maybe? Alicus? Seems amazing to realize that at a certain point in time, the practice of pharmacy moved from an arcane practice by specialists who were looked at probably as quasi-witch doctors that you tolerated because somehow they seemed to work, to an art form embellished by beautiful cabinetry like this. An elaborate scale. Again, does this like reflect a supposed advancement in technology and precision and the importance of the pharmacy that was being done? Aloes, aluminum or whatever that stuff is. Very German, but notice how pretty and elaborate they are. Perhaps hand painted. Right over there I did a face plant, and the reason I did was unlike most second or first world nations, someone had taken the cover off of a utility hole, and I fell right in it. It was about the size, about a foot in diameter. I didn't see it because I was looking, as you do, for the museum. This is the House of Arts, but it formerly was the Butcher's Hall and one of the oldest guild houses. So the downstairs part was for cutting and selling of meat, and then the upstairs probably was offices, and maybe, I don't know, maybe people stayed there, it doesn't say. Also a meeting place. And they restored the roof, so it looks very original. I don't know if we can go in and see anything that's original. The irony of that header fall was that it so jacked up my adrenaline that I actually feel pretty damn good. Although I bruised my left hand and cut my thumb hitting the ground. But what also pleases me is my reactions were good enough that I was able to brush against the side of a car with my hand and hit the ground without feeling much at all. Reminder, those 4 smaller towers found anywhere on such churches in a village indicate that they have the right to prescribe a death penalty in cases. And unfortunately, I saw a lot of villages that had those little towers. Here's where I fell. Looking for now is the stairs passage. One of the important personages of this town. And it may be that Brukenthal, like the fellow in Brasov, was wealthy enough to build all of these benefits for the community. I think this is the picturesque stairs they're talking about. It's the only thing I can find, so I'll walk down and see what I discover. This is the stairs passageway, and it also happens to be the oldest building in Sibiu. Still extant, at least. Why, I don't know. And it's picturesque to walk up because of the view, particularly this little set of buildings here. I just noticed something that is interesting right there. What's that arch for? We have a series of arches, obviously designed in part, if not totally, to hold up this wall and that building. whenever it was rebuilt, it is picturesque. And down there through that far arch is the stairway passage up to the church and the oldest building. Here's an interesting example of how these inner courtyards are used. This strings on quite a little distance with businesses and homes or apartments on all floors. Here's my restaurant for tonight. It's kind of cavern-like. I checked it out earlier, but very atmospheric. Romantic for those who are inclined that way. Well, here you get a little hint of what I meant by kind of cavern-like, and it looks like it probably was. Nice place settings, nice dinners, very clever. Waiter who speaks very good English, I think with a certain British accent, tells me that this is actually a cellar, and that a long time ago, probably in the 1600s or 1500s, it was a mansion. That's the first record of it. And this is built in the Roman arch method, of course, where there's a keystone at the top. And I don't know how they built the archway, the rest of the vault, but it must have been the same way, because it's the same essential design. And he said back in the time, in the 11th century, when Sibiu had paved streets, Bucharest wasn't even on the map. This was an extremely prominent city, and it actually stayed that way in many respects up through this last century. Being one of the first cities to, I think, have had power, and then the first to have had like a streetcar and other kind of notable things like that that define today. What kind of intrigues me is what would you do with plates like this that have these holes in them? I'm going to ask him that. And then look at the pretty napkin holder, and then let me pan over here. Well, I'll lift it up and you can see the pretty candlesticks. I'm sure they're not old, but they're interesting. That one looks old though. Even my water with gas looks kind of classy. Comes in a heavy bottle. An old house tucked into this little niche and smoothly blended into this next building. Certainly looks like all hell is breaking loose down there. Isn't that almost an oriental building? I wonder what it is. I hope they keep it vibrant, because it'll sure look horrible if it becomes a whole little spot I wanted to get a shot at.